Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to talk about the National Book Award Longlist for Fiction for 2022. These are the 10 novels that are under consideration for their fiction prize for this year. On, I think, October 4th, they will narrow it down to 5, and this is an interesting prize to follow. Before we get started, because there are a lot of really interesting books on this list, I think. I've looked at the names, but I haven't looked at the descriptions. I will mention that I am here with my buddy Jamie, who is hanging out on the couch with me. I'm wearing my Kurt Vonnegut t-shirt that I often joke whenever I wear this that it looks like the poop emoji, because this is as much of the shirt as you see while I film. Doesn't mean anything, just thought I would mention that. Anyway, we're here to talk about the National Book Award. This is a particularly interesting prize to follow because I think of the major literary prizes, they are particularly good at recognizing a diverse array of authors and stories, and I really deeply appreciate that about this prize. They can be a little bit wacky to follow because they like to recognize and promote authors who are lesser known, which means that they have a tendency to not go with books that other people have been talking about through the year. Usually, their long list is a bit of a mix. You have the established authors that people are familiar with and know and might be rooting for on the list. You have a bit of the debut authors that have really been getting a big marketing push and everybody is talking about. And then you have a small handful of lesser known books, usually debut authors, that are not getting talked about a whole lot. This list is one of those outliers where it's almost entirely unknown authors and books that have not been talked about a whole lot. There were only 3 that I had really heard of when I looked at the list. And of those 3, I really only knew enough about one to recognize the title and the author. I kind of vaguely know what one of them is about, and I really looked into the other one. So this is really going to be a journey of discovery for me. And I do love a long list because it is a great tool for discovery for books that you didn't know before and might want to add to your list. So I'm going to go through the 10 books on the list, and most of them I'm going to be hearing about for the first time. So as we go through the descriptions of the 10 books, I'm really going to be finding out about most of them for the first time and kind of making snap decisions about whether or not I want to read them or add them to my reading list, or if I might pass, or if I'm going to wait and see if I get more feedback, or maybe if they make the short list. That's kind of how I do things. So quickly, before we start getting through them, I will say, and this really to me illustrates how much this list in particular focuses on books and authors that are relatively unknown and not being talked about. Of the 10 titles on the 2022 fiction long list, 8 of them are debut works of fiction. That's a lot. That's a lot for any long list. And only one writer on this year's list has been previously honored by the National Book Awards. Gayl Jones was a finalist for the National Book Award for Fiction in 1998 for her novel, The Healing. Gayl Jones is the only author on this list that I think you could really say is established, and even she was gone from the literary world for a long time. I think after 1998, she didn't publish anything until last year, and that book, Palmares, landed on the list of finalists for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. I'll put my reaction video down below. I have complicated thoughts about that, from given what I've heard after the Pulitzer Prize and the finalists were announced, but we'll get into that when we get into her book. I'm going to start with All This Could Be Different by Thankam Mathews, because this is one that I was familiar with. And I actually mentioned it in a video that I did last week about recklessly early Pulitzer Prize predictions. And in that video, I had a specific section about books that seemed more likely to land on the National Book Award long list than they would get on the Pulitzer Prize's radar. And I think of those 5 titles, I believe it was 5, only one actually made the long list, and it's All This Could Be Different by Thankam Mathews. I'm already familiar with this book, so I'm going to tell you up front, this is a book that I'm interested in, and I have been trying to decide since it was released if I want to purchase it, because my library doesn't have a copy. I've tried to recommend that my library purchase a copy, but I'm willing to bet the library service in my state is having problems with funding right now because they have not picked up a lot of books that I have suggested that they add to their library. So I'm not optimistic that they will. It's also not on Scribd or any of my other subscription apps. So if I'm going to read this book, it feels like right now I would have to purchase it, or I'm going to have to wait for it to be out in like paperback. Maybe by then my library will have a copy, or it will have popped up on one of my app services like Scribd or Libby. So it is something, and I know that if I do break down and purchase it now, this is me being weird, I probably won't actually manage to read it until about a year from now. And at that point, it probably would have shown up either at my library or on one of those subscription apps. So I'm really having this wild back and forth with myself about whether or not I want to purchase a copy of this book. I haven't made up my mind yet. We'll see. So if you're unfamiliar, I'm just going to do a quick touch of the blurb from the publisher's website, because to be honest with you, the National Book Award website is really not good for blurbs of these books, like quick blurbs. I think part of it is because they teamed with the New Yorker to do the announcements. Like the New Yorker is actually who announced the long lists. And then I think they're just going to point you to that article if you want news about it, but it doesn't have a whole lot of really great blurbs. So anyway, point being, I'm going to the publisher website for quick blurbs about each book. So all this could be different. Graduating into the long maw of an American recession, Sneha is one of the fortunate ones. She was moved to Milwaukee for an entry-level corporate job that, grueling as it may be, is the key that unlocks every door. She can pick up the tab at dinner with her new friend Tig, get her college buddy Tom hired alongside her, and send money to her parents back in India. She begins dating women, soon developing a burning crush on Marina, a beguiling and beautiful dancer who always seemed just out of reach. But before long, trouble arrives. Painful secrets rear their heads, jobs go off the rails, evictions loom. Sneha struggles to be truly close and open with anybody, even as her friendships deepen, even as she throws herself headlong into a dizzying romance with Marina. It's then that Tig begins to draw up a radical solution to their problems, hoping to save them all. A beautiful and capacious novel rendered in singular, unforgettable prose, All This Could Be Different is a wise, tender, and riveting group portrait of young people forging love and community amidst struggle, and a moving story of one immigrant's journey to make her home in the world. Like I said, I'm interested in reading this book. I just haven't decided if I'm going to actually purchase it or wait for it to show up somewhere, or maybe wait until I'm actually ready to pick up the book and read it, because I have some other things on my plate right now, and make a decision at that point. But I'm definitely interested in it. I think this is a book that not a lot of people have talked about, but I would love to hear about. So if you've read this book, let me know what you thought of it down below. It might help me decide if I'm actually going to break down and purchase it. The next one is The Haunting of Hajji, Hotak and Other Stories by Jamil Jan Kochai. I love that the National Book Award is particularly open to short story collections. So when I say that they are open to a diverse array of authors and stories, I don't just mean diversity in terms of like race and background and the type of story that they're telling. I also mean that they're open to short story collections. And I really appreciate that, because I'm a fan of short story collections. And I know a lot of people have a bit of a bugaboo about them, but I'm a fan, and I love to see them in contention for major literary awards. And I am totally unfamiliar with this book, so this is going to be a journey. Let's see what the blurb about it on their publisher website is. Penn Hemingway finalist Jamil Jan Kochai breathes life into his contemporary Afghan characters, moving between modern-day Afghanistan and the Afghan diaspora in America. In these arresting stories verging on both comedy and tragedy, often starring young characters whose bravado is matched by their tenderness, Kochai once again captures, quote, a singular resonant voice, an American teenager raised by old-world Afghan storytellers, end quote. In playing Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, a young man's video game experience turns into a surreal exploration on his own father's memories of war and occupation. Set in Kabul, Return to Sender follows two married doctors driven by guilt to leave the U.S. and care for their fellow Afghans, even when their own son disappears. A college student in the U.S. in Hungry Ricky Daddy starves himself in protest of Israeli violence against Palestine, and in the title story, The Haunting of Hajji, Hotak, we learn the story of a man codenamed Hajji from the perspective of a government surveillance worker who becomes entrenched in the immigrant family's life. The Haunting of Hajji, Hotak and Other Stories is a moving exploration of characters grappling with the ghosts of war and displacement, and one that speaks to the immediate political landscape we reckon with today. I think I immediately respond to the intention of the book and what it's trying to do. Some of the stories, like, honestly, I'm not a video game person, so I think it's interesting to use a video game about war to reflect on a parent's experience of war, especially when the parent is an immigrant. But I think a lot would depend on the execution of it, on whether, like, how heavy is it on the video game? Because I don't know. There's a chance that I might not be able to access it, but it does sound interesting. I'm not as immediately in as I am with All This Could Be Different, just because of things like that. But it definitely sounds like it could be interesting. It totally makes sense why this is something that landed on the National Book Award jury's radar. So I think if you've read this, let me know what you thought of it, because I think it could be interesting. I'm not going to run out and get it, but I'm a little hesitant. Again, mostly because of the video game factor. Is that shallow? Probably, but life is real. And the next one is Nobody Gets Out Alive by Leigh Newman. This is another one that I was totally unfamiliar with, so here comes the blurb. Set in Newman's home state of Alaska, Nobody Gets Out Alive is an exhilarating collection about women struggling to survive not just grizzly bears and charging moose, but the raw legacy of their marriages and families. Alongside stories set in today's last frontier, rife with suburban sprawl, global warming, and opioid addiction, Newman delves into remote wilderness of the 1970s and 80s, bringing to life young girls and single moms in search of a wilder, freer, more adventurous America. The final story takes place in a railroad camp in 1915 when an outspoken heiress stages an elaborate theatrical production in order to seduce the wife of her husband's employer. Ooh. Rich with wit and wisdom, showing us that love, marriage, and family are always a bigger and more perilous adventures than backcountry trips. That is it from the starred review from Kirkus. These keenly observed stories prove there are some questions about love, heartbreak, and the meaning of home that can't be outrun no matter how hard we try. So we see again that this is a short story collection, and you see how the National Book Award is much better at promoting other forms of story than a lot of other major literary awards. And again, I really deeply appreciate that. This does sound really interesting. I'm going to leave this open because I think I mentioned recently that I tend to trust Kirkus's starred reviews, and this got one. It actually also got a starred review from Publishers Weekly, according to the little blurbs at the top. So that makes me get over a little bit of the things that might have held me back otherwise on this one. The fact that Kirkus gave it its stamp of approval. They have been pretty reliable for me in the past. So I'm going to leave this tab open and look for more information about this book. I'm not as excited about it as I was immediately intrigued by All This Could Be Different, but it does sound like it would be interesting. And if you have read it, again, please let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. I would really appreciate that. The next book is Maria, and Other Stories. So we have another story collection. And this is another one that I was completely unfamiliar with. So we're going on another journey of discovery here. This is by Marytza K. Rubio. Set against the tropics and megacities of the Americas, Maria takes inspiration from wild creatures, tarot, and the porous borders between life and death. I will say I'm not someone who is really into tarot. I'm not completely closed off to it, but I think the way people talk about tarot sometimes makes me nope. So that's immediately a bit of a red flag for me, but let's continue. Motivated by love and its inverse, grief, the characters who inhabit these stories negotiate boldly with nature to cast their desired ends. As the enigmatic community college professor in Brujeria for Beginners reminds us, quote, "There's always a price for conjuring in darkness. You won't always know what it is until payment is due," end quote. This commitment drives the disturbingly faithful widow in Tijuca, who promises to bury her husband's head in the rich dirt of the jungle, and the sisters in Moksha, who are tempted by a sleek obsidian dagger once held by a vampiric idol. But magic isn't limited to the women who wield it. As Rubio so brilliantly elucidates, animals are powerful magicians too. Subversive pigeons and hungry jaguars are called upon in tunnels, and a lonely little girl runs free with a resurrected saber-toothed tiger in Burial. A colorful catalog of gallery exhibits from animals in therapy is featured in Art Show, including the almost philandering fox who longs after the red pelt of another, and the recently rehabilitated paranoid peacocks. This is sounding like it might be a little too cute for me. Brimming with sharp wit and ferocious female intuition, these stories bubble over into the titular novella Maria, a Tropigoth family drama set in a reimagined California rainforest that explores the legacies of three Marias and possibly all Marias. Writing in prose so lush it threatens to creep off the page, Rubio emerges as an ineffable new voice in contemporary short fiction. It would definitely take feedback, like positive feedback on that book to convince me to reconsider, because right now, reading the description, it sounds interesting. It just doesn't sound like something that I'm going to respond to. And given the amount of books I'm trying to get to right now and the fact that I would definitely do the other books on this list that we've covered so far before I would do this one. So if you have read Maria by Marytza K. Rubio, let me know in the comment section down below, because right now I'm inclined to just say pass and leave it alone. But if you want to change my mind, leave a comment and show your work down below. The next one is The Town of Babylon by Alejandro Varela. I am immediately kind of not sure about the cover, but that's a shallow, literally don't judge a book by the cover. So let's see what the book is actually about in this blurb from the publisher. In this contemporary debut novel, an intimate portrait of queer, racial, and class identity. Okay, see, don't judge a book by its cover. That immediately grabs my attention. Andre, a gay Latinx professor, returns to his suburban hometown in the wake of his husband's infidelity. Okay, see, I'm in. There he finds himself with no excuse not to attend his 20-year high school reunion and hesitantly begins to reconnect with people he used to call friends. Over the next few weeks, while caring for his aging parents and navigating the neighborhood where he grew up, Andre falls into old habits with friends he thought he had left behind. Before long, he unexpectedly becomes entangled with his first love and forced to tend to past wounds. Captivating and poignant, a modern coming-of-age story about the essential nature of community, The Town of Babylon is a page-turning novel about young love and a close examination of our social systems and the toll they take when they fail us. That plot description is like a checklist of things that I am interested in. It's a queer story. It's about race. It's about class. It's about a little bit, it seems like it's reckoning a little bit with trauma in the past and reckoning with that. And the whole thing about the nature of community. Oh, I'm in. I'm going to leave this tab open so I can look for... and it has a blurb from Disha Filya, who is the author of my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. So if this book is not available at my library or on any of my subscription apps, I might have to order this. I definitely want to read it. And you see, don't judge a book by its cover, because I'm even more excited about that one than I am about All This Could Be Different. I want this book right now. Yes, absolutely. The Town of Babylon has my stamp of approval for whatever good that is. Let's move to the next one, which is one of the ones that I was familiar with. It's The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. I mentioned this in that same video I mentioned earlier about my recklessly early Pulitzer Prize predictions, because in a starred review from Kirkus, it really mentions it being a sort of interesting American story, and the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction is intended to go to an American author, preferably for a book that deals with American life. And it seems like this deals with that in an interesting way. Let's do the blurb. An online obituary writer, by the way, I should mention, the structure of the description makes it sound like a collection of short stories, but it seems like it's a collection of stories in novel form, if that makes sense. An online obituary writer, a young mother with a dark secret, a woman waging a solo campaign against rodents, neighbors separated only by the thin walls of a low-cost housing complex in the once bustling industrial center of Vacaville, Indiana. Welcome to the Rabbit Hutch. Beautiful and formidably intelligent, Blandine shares her apartment with 3 teenage boys she neither likes nor understands, all, like her, now aged out of the state foster care system that has repeatedly failed them, all searching for meaning in their lives. That immediately grabs my attention. Set over one sweltering week in July and culminating in a bizarre act of violence that finally changes everything, The Rabbit Hutch is a savagely beautiful and bitingly funny snapshot of contemporary America, a gorgeous and provocative tale of loneliness and longing, entrapment, and ultimately freedom. Quote, Gunty writes with a keen, sensitive eye about all manner of intimacies, the kind we build with other people and the kind we cultivate around ourselves and our tenuous private aspirations. End quote. That is a blurb from Raven Leilani, the author of Luster. So I actually have an audio copy of this on Libro, and I haven't been prioritizing it, but the more this book is popping up, like when I was doing research on potential Pulitzer candidates, and here I'm really interested. So I may try to prioritize that book and get to The Rabbit Hutch before the end of this year, because I definitely think that is something that I'm going to be interested in reading. And it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. So hopefully before the end of the year, I will get to it. And then the final book that I was familiar with before doing this is The Birdcatcher by Gayl Jones. I covered it in a video about books that are going to be released in the latter half of the year and struggled with whether or not I want to read it. So to recap that, Gayl Jones was discovered by Toni Morrison, who published her. She was seemed on track to becoming a really well-known writer, and then in 1998 she just took a break from writing and didn't publish anything else until last year when Palmares came out. And Palmares sounded really interesting. I had not heard of it until the Pulitzer Prizes were announced and it was a finalist. So I looked into it, and the description of it sounds interesting. It's about slavery in Brazil. Then I was doing more research about it after the Pulitzer Prizes were announced, and I came across a review. I don't remember the name of the channel, but I have linked it before. I'll find the link to it and put it in the description box down below, from someone who has a booktube channel who is actually Brazilian, and she basically spends an hour talking about all the problematic decisions that Gayl Jones made in crafting that book and the ways in which she wildly misrepresented the history of Brazil. And Gayl Jones in an interview has said, and this actually does not make it better, she said it in Brazil because she didn't really want to reckon with being true to the American experience of slavery. She didn't do research on Brazil because she didn't think she had to. She just kind of wanted to, she wanted the freedom to be allowed to create her own space without dealing with history and being historically accurate. And the problem is, if that was her intention, she really should have just made up a country. She chose a country that has its own history of slavery, which is different from America's history with slavery. It has its own problems, its own legacies, its own traumas. And pretending that it is like a corollary to America's experience of slavery, but also not bothering to learn anything about it, led to a lot of really problematic cultural things in the book, like even to the point where she doesn't get the language that people speak right. And knowing that made me very hesitant. I basically scrapped plans to read Palmares at that point. But when it was announced that she had another book coming out, I was interested in it until I saw that it is set in Ibiza. So I worry that she's kind of repeating the same thing, where she's deliberately setting it somewhere else so she won't have to reckon with an American context, but because she's choosing a real location, is it going to be as problematic as Palmares sounded like it ultimately was? Here's the description. Gayl Jones, the novelist Toni Morrison discovered decades ago and Tayari Jones recently called her favorite writer, has been described as one of the great literary writers of the 20th century. Now, for the first time in over 20 years, Jones is publishing again in the wake of her long-awaited fifth novel, Palmares. I apologize, my neighbor is mowing their lawn, so if you can hear that, I'm sorry. The Birdcatcher is another singular achievement, a return to the circles of her National Book Award finalist, The Healing. Set primarily on the island of Ibiza, the story is narrated by the writer Amanda Wordlaw, whose closest friend, a gifted sculptor named Catherine Sugar, is repeatedly institutionalized for trying to kill a husband who never leaves her. The three form a quirky triangle on the whitewashed sand. And I believe Gayl Jones herself had a sort of complicated relationship with the man who was her husband as well. I don't know the history of it well enough to draw corollaries to that, but it sounds interesting. A study in Black women's creative expression and the intensity of their relationships, this work from Jones shows off her range and insight into the vicissitudes of all human nature, rewarding longtime fans and bringing her talent to a new generation of readers. I feel like this is guaranteed a spot on the shortlist, especially since it's the only established author on the list. But I'm really waiting to see if this is going to repeat the problem that came up with Palmares. So if you have read this, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, because it sounds interesting, but I have concerns. So let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. I would love to hear it, because it sounds like it could be a good book, but I just have questions. All right, we have two more. When We Were Sisters by Fatimah Asghar. This is one of the ones that I think I had seen the cover, but didn't really know anything about. In this heart-rending lyrical debut work of fiction, Fatimah Asghar traces the intense bond of three orphaned siblings who, after their parents die, are left to raise one another. Their youngest, Kausar, grapples with the incomprehensible loss of their parents as she also charts out her own understanding of gender. Aisha, the middle sister, spars with her crybaby younger sibling as she desperately tries to hold on to her sense of family in an impossible situation. And Noreen, the eldest, does her best in the role of sister-mother while also trying to create a life for herself on her own terms. As Kausar grows up, she must contend with the collision of her private and public worlds and choose whether to remain in the life of love, sorrow, and codependency that she's known, or carve out a new path for herself. When We Were Sisters tenderly examines the bonds and fractures of sisterhood, names the perils of being three Muslim American girls alone against the world, and ultimately illustrates how those who've lost everything might still make homes in one another. That sounds really interesting to me. Again, it kind of is almost like a checklist of things, not to the extent that the Town of Babylon was for me, but I'm going to leave this tab open because I want to seek out more information about this book. And if you have read it, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, please, because this definitely jumps out as something that I could potentially be interested in reading. And I'm sorry, I lied. Now there are two more books to cover. The next one is Shutter by Ramona Emerson, which I have never heard of before. Let's get to the description. So this one, I believe, is a thriller. And it's not unheard of for the National Book Award to put a thriller on the long list. They tend not to make the short list. Here we go. Rita Todachin is a forensic photographer working for the Albuquerque police force. Her excellent photography skills have cracked many cases. She is almost supernaturally good at capturing details. In fact, Rita has been hiding a secret. She sees the ghosts of crime victims who point her toward the clues that other investigators overlook. As a lone portal back to the living for traumatized spirits, Rita is terrorized by nagging ghosts who won't let her sleep and who sabotage her personal life. Her taboo and psychologically harrowing ability was what drove her away from the Navajo reservation, where she was raised by her grandmother. It has isolated her from her friends and gotten her into trouble with the law. And now it might be what gets her killed. When Rita is sent to photograph the scene of a supposed suicide on a highway overpass, the furious, discombobulated ghost of the victim, who insists she was murdered, latches onto Rita, forcing her on a quest for revenge against her killers, and Rita finds herself in the crosshairs of one of Albuquerque's most dangerous cartels. Written in sparkling, gruesome prose, Shutter is an explosive debut from one of crime fiction's most powerful new voices. I don't do a lot of mystery thrillers anymore. Mostly it's because I don't like what the genre has turned into in the wake of Gone Girl. Too much trying to mess with your head and trick you. Unreliable narrators and the like. This is at least different, but doesn't grab my attention. So if you've read this, let me know in the comment section down below if I should reconsider, because it doesn't sound like enough to get me back into the mystery genre. It kind of almost sounds like the plot of Ghost as well, like Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze, but with a cartel and a Navajo reservation. So yeah, I'm gonna say that I'm gonna pass on that for now, and let me know if you think I should change my mind and show your work in the comment section down below. The final book is actually, I think the third one that I had heard of, but only in passing, enough to be familiar with the cover of the book and the title. It is If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. In the 1970s, Topper and Sanya flee to Miami as political violence consumes their native Kingston. But America, as the couple and their two children learn, is far from the promised land. Excluded from society as black immigrants, the family pushes on through Hurricane Andrew and later the 2008 recession, living in a house so cursed that the pet fish launches itself out of its own tank rather than stay. But even as things fall apart, the family remains motivated, often to its own detriment, by what their younger son, Trelawney, calls, quote, the exquisite, racking compulsion to survive, end quote. Masterfully constructed with heart and humor, the linked stories in Jonathan Escoffery's If I Survive You center on Trelawney as he struggles to carve out a place for himself amid financial disaster, racism, and flat-out bad luck. After a fight with Topper, himself reckoning with his failures as a parent and his longing for Jamaica, Trelawney claws his way out of homelessness through a series of odd, often hilarious jobs. Meanwhile, his brother, Delano, attempts a disastrous cash grab to get his kids back, and his cousin, Kyuki, looks for a father who does not want to be found. As each character searches for a foothold, they never forget the profound danger of climbing without a safety net. Pulsing with vibrant lyricism and inimitable style, sly commentary, and contagious laughter, Escoffery's debut unravels what it meant to be in between homes and cultures in a world at the mercy of capitalism and whiteness. With If I Survive You, Escoffery announces himself as a prodigious storyteller in a class of his own, a chronicler of American life at its most gruesome and hopeful. This also feels like a definite for the shortlist. I have heard good things about it loosely. I just hadn't really sat down to look at the plot description of it before, and it feels like maybe this is one that's going to build momentum. I had been really hoping that Night of the Living Rez would make the long list, and it seems like this is almost like a natural substitute. I mean, I'm not saying that they deliberately chose one over the other, but Night of the Living Rez is linked stories about the American experience from a native. This is linked stories about the American experience from an immigrant. So they kind of do have a corollary, even though I'm sure that the jury was not looking at it like that. And this does sound really interesting. I'm going to leave this tab open and I'm going to see if that's available anywhere. So I am not going to do a prediction on what will make the shortlist, but I will say, looking at the 10 books, I immediately gravitated to The Town of Babylon, of course. All This Could Be Different, The Rabbit Hutch, If I Survive You, and I would say When We Were Sisters as well. So those are the 5 books that I immediately gravitated to in terms of the descriptions. So I think they would sort of make natural selections for the shortlist. But again, I was very unfamiliar with most of the books on this list. So if there's one that you think should make the shortlist or would like to make a case for it, let me know in the comment section down below. I have gone a little long, so I'm not going to talk about any of the other lists. I don't really react to them anyway, but I have not had a chance to do a dive into the young people's literature list. The winner of that category last year was a book that I read this year and loved, last night at the Telegraph Club. When I pulled up the list, I immediately gravitated to The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes, and that is on Scribd as an audio, so I have it saved and I would love to get to it. I am going to try to spend some time looking at the rest of the books on the young people's literature list to see if there's anything else interesting on that list as well. Because again, I think the National Book Award is really great at promoting lesser known and more diverse authors and stories, and I just the fact that they have so many stories and linked story collections in this list makes me happy. So I'd love to hear what you think of this list. I'm happy with it, although it does feel like there's not an anchor to grab you in because the titles are largely unfamiliar unless you know of Gayl Jones from the Pulitzer announcement, and unless you've heard of If I Survive You. It's very possible that a lot of people would see this list and just think, I don't know any of those. And usually I wonder if the bigger titles kind of draw you in and then you can discover the others. So I think it's an interesting list now that I have looked into it, but it takes that added step of really looking at the titles and seeing what they're about. But this seems pretty solid to me. I would love to hear what you think of it, what you gravitate to from the list. If you'd like to make a case for anything, let me know in the comment section down below. By the way, I should mention, October 4th is when they are announcing the shortlist. I will be in Italy. So I don't know if I will be able to film a reaction to the shortlist. We'll see how that goes. I'm trying not to record a lot of videos while I'm in Italy. It's gonna be what it's gonna be. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, as always, I really appreciate your time and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.